Thanks, guys. I'm really glad that you guys are here. Today is kind of exciting for me. This is kind of one of the first things I get to do as part of the team, and I'm pumped about it. Small groups has been a huge part of my life for the last few years, even before coming to Bridgewater, and so I absolutely love getting engaged into small groups. I find that most of my really powerful, meaningful relationships and discipleship relationships happen in small group, and so I love it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're going to talk a little bit about the why. Why do we do small groups? Why does Bridgewater see it as such an important part of the strategy for making more and better disciples of Jesus Christ, so that you get a little bit more of the background behind it. And then some of the things that we're starting to do to help our team, our leaders, give them the resources to succeed, help them to grow the group, to build relationships, and then hopefully multiply that group so we can have more groups and reach more people and build better and more relationships. All right. Right now at Bridgewater, if you take the average attendance over the last few months, every weekend here at Bridgewater, and then look at the groups that we have that just ended in May. May was kind of when our season ended, so to speak. We had 63 groups, but we have probably about 1,800 or so on an average attendance on the weekend, okay? Which is awesome. If you do some math, though, if you doubled all of our groups, if every one of our groups split and created two groups, we have a problem. We still don't have enough groups for all of our people who are attending on Sunday to get into community groups, to get into a small group, build community, build relationships. And so that's kind of a problem, right? So one of the things we're trying to do is just build a scaffolding, build a structure so that we can help build some more groups and build some more relationships, okay? So when I think about groups, okay, I think about large groups, I think about getting together with my friends. Often what I start to think about is just a bunch of people hanging out, right? I start to think about a bunch of people like this picture, if you throw it up, sitting down by the lake, right? I think of all my friends getting together and just hanging out. We got a crowd of people, we're having a blast. There's a problem, though, with large crowds, okay? Our goal on Sunday mornings, we've got a crowd of people coming at Bridgewater, and it's awesome. Right? We celebrate that. We will continue to celebrate that, okay? But when you start to get a large crowd together and you start trying to build relationships, eventually a couple of things happen. Large crowds, eventually people stop talking, right? Some people, just by nature of who they are, which is completely fine, in their relationships or in their introvertedness, whatever, will just start to be quiet and observe and sit off to the side or whatever, and there's nothing wrong with that. Other people, based on maybe their ability to influence, maybe their position, maybe their personality, whatever it is, they kind of keep talking, and eventually we end up like this. We end up like we are today with one person up front talking and 100 people sitting in a room listening. There's nothing wrong with this. We do this all the time. We do it every weekend. It's highly effective to teach and to dispense some information and to help people learn and understand. This is immensely effective in that setting. But it does have some limitations, right? Because if you're trying to love a crowd, a couple things got to be present that you don't necessarily see present in that. And these are two that I think are highly important. The first one is the one another's in Scripture. It's really hard to love one another with all of those principles in Scripture we see in the New Testament in a crowd. You guys are getting to know me a little bit this morning because I'm the one talking, but the majority of people in the room, I won't have the same opportunity to get to know you this morning, right? When we talk about diving deeper into relationships, it's really hard to do that in a crowd. The second thing is a concentration of relationships. And tying back to that whole idea of you guys get to know me more, but I don't get to know you guys, there's a concentration of a one-way single relationship, but it's really hard on a Sunday morning in 10 minutes before or 10 minutes after service to build a highly concentrated relationship and go deep, right? Really to get into each other's lives. It's difficult. What we tend to see is that the larger the crowd, the more people stop talking. But the smaller the group or smaller the crowd, the relationships start to go deeper, become more intimate. People feel freer to share, and they begin to share freely and interact. People who might be introverted or might be quiet in a large group, if you only have a small group in a different setting, might open up and share immensely, right? eventually you get that small group down to 2 people over a cup of coffee at your local coffee shop, and they can have a dialogue for hours, right? So we've got to find this like sweet spot somewhere. I think it's somewhere between like 8 and 15 people. And in that group, you've got a group large enough that people can be heard and build relationships, but it's small enough that people don't get lost on the outsides, right? Because here's the basic point is you can't love a crowd. At least not the way I see it in Scripture, where we're supposed to build relationships, dive into, and apply all of those one another's we see in Scripture. You can't do that in a crowd. And so small groups is a huge part of the strategy for Bridgewater, and here's the reason why. You can't love a crowd this way. And so we've got to have another setting that allows people to dig into relationships, dive in a little bit deeper, and apply the Bible, build relationships, and care for each other. And the strategy we've got for that is small groups, all right? Now, before we keep going, I do have a question for you guys. I just want to know what you're thinking. What are you coming in this morning with? Most of the time when I would go to a training or anything like this to learn more about small groups, I had questions in the back of my mind that I was thinking about. That I go, man, I would really love to learn this, or I'd really love to understand this. Now, I'm going to be straight up front with you. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer all of the questions. I'm not sure that I know the answer to the questions, and I'm not sure that we're going to cover them this morning. But what I would love to know is some of those things you're coming in with, because if we touch on them this morning, that'd be really helpful, but also it gives me an idea of what kind of things I need to go back and study. What kind of things I got to go back and I got to ask questions and I got to learn so that I can help you guys and our team can talk about and try to figure out. So I've got some whiteboards up here, and I'm just curious. Does anybody have some questions that you're like, this is what I'm hoping to walk out with today, because I'm coming in with a big question about how to do this or how to learn this or what happens in this kind of situation. Does anybody have anything like that you're willing to share? Yeah.
Most effective way, when you've got somebody who isn't really joining in, like they haven't quite opened up,
Okay.
it's an effective way to make it easy for them to begin joining and talking.
So I'm going to rephrase, correct me if I'm wrong, but for those who didn't hear, she said kind of when you have somebody in the group who's not really opening up and joining in on the conversation, how do you kind of draw them in to part of the group? Am I representing that correctly? Awesome. Tim, could you do me a favor? Could you help me by writing some of these questions up on the board for us? Anybody else? Here, give me one of those. Go ahead, sir. How do you develop an apprentice, like a co-leader, somebody who can then split off or multiply your group? That's an excellent question. Do you mind helping me out and writing up on here for me? And then stay up here because we might have a couple other ones. Anybody else? Yeah. How do you handle serial group killers? Man, you had that one in your pocket ready to go. How do you handle serial group killers? Anybody else? Yeah.
As an apprentice kind of coming in and getting ready to possibly aid in starting a new small group, how do you know, as far as like structurally, what to go in with, whether it be like debate-based, like topic-based, or like study-based? How do you know which to start with? I mean, is it something you just kind of throw at the group and see what they want to do? Or?
So let me rephrase, just in case you guys didn't hear him. Your question was, Daniel, right? Question was, as a new group leader, kind of walking in, trying to pick a topic or discussion that we're going to walk through for the coming weeks, how do you determine what that is, right? Not just the topic itself, right? But also the method, what's it look like? Is that fair? That's a good question. Anybody else? We got 4 questions today. That's awesome. Yes, ma'am. Oh, that's a great question. For those of you who didn't hear, when somebody's dominating the conversation, like monopolizing the conversation, how do you redirect, get them to maybe be quiet, and then allow other people to speak up a little bit? Is that fair? That's a great question. You are not the only one asking that. I guarantee it. And if somebody in the room is saying, I've never asked that question this year, you probably will, okay? That's a really good question. Anybody else? Yes? So again, I'm going to rephrase it in case you didn't hear Av. If kind of building on Daniel's question, if you kind of head this direction with the topic and somebody else goes, I don't want to do that, I want to head this direction, how do you either bring them back or amend that a little bit? Is that fair? That's a good question. There was another hand. Yes, ma'am.
Have you determined as of yet what's the best time frame, like doing it 6, 8 weeks in a row, or like taking breaks, or how long to keep one group together?
Okay, so some of the logistics, right? So she's asking if, do we do 6 weeks at a time, a 10-week cycle? Do you do a semester? Do you do it for the whole year? And then how long do groups just keep going? That was the second part of that, right? How long do they keep going before you go, okay, you guys need to stop and go to another group, start over, or whatever, or split up? Is that fair representation of your question? That's a good question. And you are not the only one asking that. I'm asking that too, trying to figure that out. And hopefully we can talk about that a little bit. Anybody else? Ben, go ahead.
How do you know when to tell someone no, they can't join your group?
Oh, that's a really good question. How do you tell somebody no, they can't join? Or I'm going to spin that a little bit different, ask somebody to not come back. Hopefully that is not the normal experience, but every once in a while, it may be necessary. How do you do that? How do you navigate that conversation well? That's an excellent question. Anybody else? Hey guys, thank you for helping me out up here. I'm going to give you guys a book just for the fun of it. This one is a book we read as a staff called Small Town Jesus, and I've heard excellent things about it. They read it as staff before I got here, to be honest, but I've heard excellent things. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Yeah, give them a hand. They did a good job. Okay, so like I said, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to all of these questions, but I want to kind of know what people are thinking. What are some of the issues that may come up in your groups or groups you've been a part of in the past that you've kind of wondered, and how do you handle that? What do you do with that? And we will get to some of these. I can tell you we're going to get to them this morning. Other ones I might have to do some digging to come back to you with something that's solid. But they're excellent questions, and I can assure you every one of these is asked by multiple people. So if you're asking it, don't be discouraged. You're not alone, and we've got to find a way to make sure we handle them well and honor God in the way we do it, as well as help our people follow Jesus, okay? So if you can't love a crowd, here's a statement we use all the time. Jumping back into this real quick. If you can't love a crowd, but we want to pursue small groups, we talk about this statement a lot. Life is better connected. Okay, this is one of the core values here at Bridgewater. We've got 5 core values, and this would be one of them. Life is better connected. And this is why small groups are so big. This is why it's such a big deal for us, is because it's hard to love a crowd. We're acknowledging that, and small groups is how you get connected, build relationships, and then help those relationships move forward in following Jesus together, right, in the journey. So if this is true, we want to kind of think through how do we help people get connected? What it takes to help people get connected. So some of you today, I got to interact with a few people, and when you came in, I was kind of asking you, are you in a group? And you said, yes. Are you leading a group? And you said, no, but looking at possibly this coming September. Now, there's a lot that goes into leading small groups, okay? But there are some things, I'm going to call them the common denominators, that these are the bare necessities, okay? You build on these. This isn't everything, but this, if you've got these few things, this is going to help you tremendously. And if one of these is lacking, then it hurts you even from out of the gate, okay? So let's just talk through some of these basic, foundational things. I'm going to use a little acronym called HOST, okay? But here's the H. You've got to love people. It's my experience that if the leader doesn't love people, at a heart of hearts level, the group will know that. And eventually, they will leave. You will not build significant relationships if you're just there to be the leader or there to share all of your knowledge. You've got to love people. You've got to, at a heart level, really care about people and say, man, I want them to succeed. I want them to grow. And that then tailors some of the way you approach some things. That's a necessity. And we might think that there's a secondary thing in my head that, there's this other priority for me, but they won't know, and I'm telling you, they will know that. If you don't love people, it eventually will come through very clearly and loudly. The next one here, this is kind of a basic thing, right? You got to open a space. For many of our groups, this means they open their own space. They open their house. For other groups, the host family and the leader of the small group are completely different people, right? And that's completely cool. You just got to open some kind of a space, work with somebody who can help on the hospitality side if you're not good at it, and make sure that there's a space available. Basically, it looks like the logistics, kind of working through, making sure I got a space open, where we're going to meet, what time, okay? And if you can do that, then you're on the right road. The next one is serve something. I would tell you that all small groups serve something, okay? Even if it's a glass of ice water, serve something, okay? We can all grab solo cups, put some ice in them, put some water in them, okay? But serve something. You put something in somebody's hand, and I don't know what it is, I don't know all the studies, but it defuses the tension in the room just a little bit and helps get conversations moving. I would tell you the bare minimum is a glass of water, okay? But I would also tell you that I would bet 90% of our groups serve way more than that. I know some groups do a full-out dinner. Some groups just do snacks or appetizers. Other groups put out chips and salsa. Somebody who loves people and loves just engaging with people will hardly ever stop with a glass of water, okay? But that's the bare minimum. Just put something in their hand and it defuses the tension in the room slightly, which is fantastic and gets people kind of around a water cooler, so to speak, right? It works, okay? The next one I would say, last one, is you got to turn it on and tell us how it went. It's just, the T in this is really simple. At a bare minimum, you've got to turn on something to get a study going. There are so many more things involved in that, but at the bare minimum, you've got to be willing to say, I can put on a video, I can get a study going, and then you've got to communicate to people and say, here's how it went, here's the questions I have, right? If somebody has an issue, something arises, then we've got a host of people who can coach and mentor and disciple people as they work through some of those issues in building relationships. But at the bare minimum, that's it, okay? There's a lot more to it. I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but sometimes people think, well, for me to say I'm willing, that means all host of things. And not necessarily, okay? It really just means a few things. And then maybe the best step forward, if you were to talk with, let's say, your campus pastor and say, hey, I'm willing to do that, then they can say, okay, well, listen, there are some things that kind of build on that, maybe some knowledge of the Bible, the thing you want to study, how you want to do that. And so we're gonna work with you. And maybe what they can do is they can find somebody else who doesn't have the time to lead, but we can put them in your group and they can help you kind of shore up some of those other sides, right? But this is what I would say the common denominators. If you were to raise your hand and say, hey, I'm willing, I can do that, then that gives our campus guys, that gives our coaches and our champions, that gives them a starting point, and then they can have a conversation with you to figure out the best way to move forward, okay? So if you're even talking about, some of you have been leading for a long time, and you're going, man, I see people all over the place that I would love to see them lead a group, but they're not able to right now. And I would ask you, can they do that? If they can do that, then it's worth the conversation. Because if we doubled our groups today, we still don't have enough, okay? So if we did this, it's going to mean more work for me. That's what it's going to mean. It's going to mean the champions are going to hit me up. The campus pastors can go, you got to meet with this guy for coffee and help him understand how to do X, Y, Z. Hey, can you set a time to get some information to this person? I'll do all of that. And our campus champions and our campus pastors have all of that stuff in their hip pocket, and they can deliver it. They can help people and mentor people like crazy, okay? And so that's kind of the bare minimum. Now from there, we go to this whole idea of loving people, okay? When I think about loving people, I think that there's a lot of stress behind that, okay? So in a nutshell, here's what I would tell you. If you want to understand loving people, this is basically what it looks like, is understanding another one of our core values. Everybody has a next step, everybody. And if you understand that everyone has a next step, then you can love people pretty easily, okay? Ben, hit that next slide. Here's a statement I would throw up here. Loving people looks like this. Takes form in helping someone identify their next step, encouraging them to take a move on it, and then celebrating it when they do. If you can help people do that, if you can love people that way, that's a win for me. Identifying their next step, helping people just identify what their next step is, encouraging them to move on it, and then celebrating it when they do, okay? So if you were to do that, where do you start? If you're going to kick off a group, you're going to jump back in September. Here's 3 things. Really simple, nothing crazy, The first one is I would tell you to slow down and get to know people. If the whole idea of small groups is to apply the Bible to our lives and build relationships, just stop worrying about all the details and just get to know people. Build some relationships, talk to them, hear their stories. Man, when people tell their stories, I love that because they share so much more information than I could ever ask for in a pointed question. Okay? And here's, as you get to know them, 2 things I want you to look for. The first one is this: look for next steps, the big next steps. Here's what I mean by that. It's clear to me that this person is not a follower of Jesus. A huge next step for them is they need to accept the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's a big next step. Pay attention for that. Another one would be, hey, they're a follower of Jesus, but they have not yet been baptized. That's a big next step, okay? I'm getting to know them. They're not serving yet in our church. Man, we've got to get them connected somehow that way. Those are the big ones that our church at all of our campuses are constantly talking about and making available, okay? Then on top of that, look for some personal steps. These are some of the ones that aren't going to be for everybody, but they're going to be for them. As you hear their story, some things will pop up. Whether it's some relationship issues, it might be the way that they interact with their kids, it might be their marriage, it might be some peripheral relationships, it might be work, it might be finances, it might be their way in over their head, their debt. And maybe at that point you might go, hey, listen, I don't know everything, but have you thought about taking financial peace? That's a class we teach at Bridgewater. I don't know if some of the other church represented, you guys might as well. That is an awesome class. And if you can kick people and point people to that to help them with some of those personal next steps, it's extremely valuable, okay? That's where I'd start. Slow down, get to know people, and then just as you're listening, as you're having a conversation and living life with them, look for those. Look for the big steps and the personal steps. Here's the deal. You got to build relationships for when they need it, okay? When we talk about relationships, there's this whole thing that sometimes, at least for me, I think about, man, I want to give people truth, but how do I know if they're ready to receive it? And there's this parable that Jesus talked about, the parable of the sowers in all the synoptic gospels, Matthew 13, Mark 4, Luke 8, and he talks through the sower, the seed, the soil. And I want to look at this real quick with you, okay? Now, Ben, as I read through this text, just kind of walk people through it visually up on the screen, okay? And I'm going to read Matthew 13 in 2 different passages. And up on the screen, I'm just laying it out for you as we talk through it, okay? So instead of reading it in your Bible, just kind of follow along with me. A farmer went out to sow his seed. He was scattering the seed, and some fell along the path. And the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on the rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up, choked the plants. And still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 160 or 30 times what was sown. And then he goes on and he starts to tell us what these equal. What do these represent? In just a few other verses, if you jump down, if you're reading this for yourself in verse 18, it says this. Now listen then to what this parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. And this is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on the rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. Verse 23, but the seeds falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. And this is the one who produces a crop yielding 160 or 30 times what was sown. So a couple things we see. I think numerically, okay? So what I see when I put this on paper is I got a 25% chance, 1 in 4 ratio, okay? Now I know there's more, I know there's a ton more in, okay? I know that. There's a ton of things that go into it, and I understand that, and I know I'm simplifying a little bit, okay? But there's a 1 in 4 chance that if I give truth, the gospel to somebody, I got a 1 in 4 chance that it's going to stick, okay? My immediate question from that is, okay, what's my role and what am I supposed to do? That seems overwhelming. Now, one of the other things that I think numerically, okay, is the yield on a 25% chance is fantastic. Did you notice that? Some of them 30, 60, 100-fold. That's incredible. What that means to me is that it is completely worth it. Outside of my personal obedience to my Jesus, it is completely worth that investment, okay? Because the return on that investment has an opportunity for huge benefit, okay? So I look at that and I get somewhat discouraged, and then I get really excited. And I think about my role, which is just keep casting the seed. Just keep giving truth. Keep sharing the gospel. Okay? But timing plays a part for me. I'm going to be honest with you. Okay? I need to keep telling people truth. I need to keep building relationships and keep giving them the gospel. Very true. But there are times where I sit there across the table from somebody and I go, is now the right time for him to hear this? Will he hear me? Have you guys ever thought that? Have you ever been like, man, he needs to hear this, but will he listen if I tell him now? Okay? I think that. And I've started to wonder this question, how do you know when the soil is ready? And I think a better question would be this question. How does God soften soil? How does God soften soil? Now, I'm not a farmer. I've gotten to interact with some farmers as I've done business in the past, and I understand a little bit, okay? Maybe you will know even more than I do, but I know that if you soften soil, you got to do something to the soil. It won't really soften itself. Either you're going to add something to the soil to soften it up, or you're just going to punch it, you're pulverize it, right? You're going to drag a plow through it, okay? If I were to answer this question, here's what I would say. How does God soften soil? He sends a storm. That's what he does. God sends a storm. There's a guy named Mike who I used to work with, and I used to share the gospel with him over and over again, and it was like bouncing off the wall. He just never heard it. And then something happened in his life, wrecked him. He called me at 9 o'clock at night and goes, I need to meet you for breakfast tomorrow morning. All of a sudden, the storm entered his life, and oh my goodness, was he ready, right? Our goal is to build some relationships for when that storm comes, you're the one they call. You're the one sitting across the table to be able to have the relationship, have the conversation, okay? And you've got to build relationships ahead of time to have that conversation. And you can't do that in a crowd. That's why small groups are so important. Rick Warren would say it this way. He would say, people come to Christ in transition or under tension. And so as we build relationships, we're looking for things that are happening, and we're looking for opportunities. And there's a huge sign for us when we see a storm and we go, man, God's doing something, and I bet he's making that soil soft. Man, I gotta have a conversation with him. I'll leave you with a quote as we end this first session by C.S. Lewis when he talks about this. He says this in The Problem of Pain. Pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks to us in our conscience, but shouts to us in our pains. It's his megaphone to rouse our deaf ears. I think this is true. I've found it to be true as I've talked with different people about Jesus Christ. Small groups is so important to me personally, because if I can build relationships with people and have the relationship in place, continuing to speak truth into their life, they may not hear it. But when the time comes where God sends a storm, softens the soil of their heart, I'm praying that I'm the one they call. I'm praying that the next week at community group, that comes up and we get to talk about it. And we get to come back to the gospel, share the gospel, and apply it to our lives. Simply put, I wanted to take this first little bit of time and answer the question, why are small groups so important? Because we can't love a crowd on a Sunday morning. Not the way we can in small groups throughout the week.